In this tutorial for heavyathlete.com, we're going to be following up where we left off from our creating a game tutorial and show you all the things that you can do once you have a game on Heavy Athlete. So the quickest way to get to your game page and modify it if you are a director is click your AD dashboard button. Under modify a game, you will either have a list of links so that you can select the game you want to modify, or you have a search bar so that you can find it. I'm not going to be using either of those methods to find the game. I'm going to find the game using the search bar on the top right here. Using the search bar on the top right there takes you to the game as an athlete would see it. The only difference between this view and how an athlete views it is since you are the athletic director for the game, you have this remove athlete column, which obviously athletes do not have access to. You can feel free to click this if you want. It takes you to another screen to confirm that you want to actually finish removing the athlete. Read the disclaimer. Don't click this if you don't want to. You can always hit back to, hop back to our actual screen. Under the description for the game, you'll see an option that says View Dashboard. This is always available for the athletic director of a game, but obviously, again, not available to athletes. Clicking on it will take you to our main dashboard page. We'll talk about this page more in a moment, but first I want to hop into two of the different features on the left-hand side here because I think that those two are the most important for new athletic directors to the site. The first one is Update Game Profile. This takes you back to effectively the same page you had when you created the game. So if you need to modify anything, for example, price, number of athletes, you need to update the description, update your logo URL so that you show up in our Find Upcoming Games feature, change the registration date, add a class, anything that you might need to do, you can tweak that here and then just hit Save Changes. Hitting Save Changes will take you back to the game page so that you can see those changes reflected in the system. For example, if we had changed it from Beaver Dam to Partlow, it would now say Partlow. Hitting View Dashboard, we come back here. The other major feature that we need to go over is Update Scores, which is directly under Update Game Profile. As you can see, we have a list of all of our flights. We start with amateur men, then amateur women, then masters men for this particular game. And then we have all of the athletes ordered in those flights. These boxes are just text boxes. You can type in whatever scores you have for each event. Please only type in numbers. The system will hopefully catch it if you type in random characters, but I don't guarantee it. So please just type in numbers. That's all that we're actually putting into these things. Place should be self-explanatory. This is where the athlete finished in the game. If you don't have final scoring yet, just don't enter them yet. Game points is, again, just for game scoring. This is your way of keeping track of who won how many events so that you know very quickly at a glance where everybody placed. Then we obviously have the 9 standard events. These will always show up. You can't disable them on this screen, but if, for example, all athletes in a flight did not contest that event or nobody made a proper mark in that event, they will not display on the main view of the game page if they're simply left blank. The first box in each of these event categories is for feet. The second one is for inches, and that's true for 8 of the 9 events. The only odd one out is obviously caber. If you hover over this blue icon, you'll see a text box pop up which explains how you should enter caber scores. Anytime you see that blue eye icon anywhere on the site, simply hover your mouse over it or click it if you're on mobile, and you should get a pop-up that gives a little bit more context and information about how to use that feature. The long story short for Caber is if you include a semicolon, you're entering a time. If you don't have a semicolon, you're entering a degree. Pretty simple. The other thing to notice on this page, if I continue scrolling right, is that we have both an add event button and the ability to remove athletes. This remove athlete button is the exact same button that you have on the main game view. So if somebody drops out for whatever reason, you can simply remove them here as well. Add event allows you to add custom events to your game. Say, for example, your pro class's sheaf bag, which normally 20 pounds, was destroyed in a tragic accident. So you let them throw with a 16-pound sheaf bag instead. Well, you want to enter those scores because they in fact threw them and you want to record that for posterity, but you don't want it to be recorded in the actual rankings because that would be unfair. They threw a lighter implement. You can simply type in here, sheaf, and then whatever specification you want on it, 16 pound, and hit add event. You can also type into these text boxes before you hit add event, and it will also work. Anything that you do in a custom event will not show up in rankings, which is both a blessing and a curse. If you don't want something to show up in rankings, for example, you think something is off with the weight of your heavy hammer, you can enter heavy hammer and then whatever description of why it's not entered into rankings over here under a custom event, and then enter people's scores as normal. You will always be able to see these custom events on the game page, but again, they do not affect rankings and they are not counted for rankings. So you can use this for weird things that happen day of on the field. You can also use it if you're just running other competition styles. For example, Highlander, which is the mix of Highland games and strongman comps. Technically speaking, you could run an entire strongman comp or any other comp you want via our site. You would just have to keep scrolling past the 9 standard events to get over to your custom events. So I don't necessarily recommend it, but it is an option. When you are entering scores into the Heavy Athlete system, we only accept freedom units for our scores. Things must be recorded in feet and inches. That is for data validation purposes. If you are a metric user, then we still only accept our scores in inches and feet. Now that I've switched over to metric, I have these options at the top of every flight. If you enter a metric score, for example, 50 meters, I have no idea if that's good or not. I use freedom units. But it tells you 50 meters is 164 feet, 0.504 inches. You should find it pretty easy to convert whatever score you have in meters into a score in feet and inches at the click of a button. This updates in effectively real time as you're typing. It takes about a quarter second to get a response back from our server. So there you go. Hopefully our metric users aren't too dissatisfied with this. All of these operate independently, so you can just kind of have a notepad to jot changes down as you're going. So please enter all your scores in feet and inches, otherwise things will get a little wacky. For our custom events, these are the only things that don't automatically translate because these are just strings. You can type whatever you want here and they will not automatically convert between feet and inches and meters because I have no idea what you typed in there. Once you have entered all of your scores and you have this looking correct in how you want it, you need to scroll down to the bottom and hit submit. If you don't hit submit, you aren't saving your work. There's too many data fields here for me to save every time somebody updates any of these fields. So make sure you save your work. Make sure you hit submit. When you hit submit, you will be taken back to the main game view so that you can see what the athletes will see after you've made those changes. Heading back to our dashboard, there's one other button that I want to cover before all the others, and that is the Send to NASGA button. If you click this button, all the scores, as they are right now in the Heavy Athlete system, will be sent over to NASGA. So we will mirror all of your scores automatically for you. You can use our much cleaner, faster way of entering scores, and then one button, it's on NASGA. It takes about a minute for scores to move from our system over to NASGA because I don't have any magical access to NASGA. They're being typed in by a computer, but they are being typed in like they would be on NASGA normally. The other thing to know about the Send to NASGA button is it does not delete any data on NASGA. There's pros and cons to this. The pro is you can't use our system to go muck around and just destroy the NASGA database. So that's a pretty large pro. The con is that NASGA will not respect updated scores that are put in this way. To actually update a score on NASGA, you must delete the old score and then update it with a new one. So, for example, if I head back to update scores, let's say that for Brandon, I messed up and only gave him a 20-foot open stone, and then I caught that error and corrected it here to be 30-foot. If I resend it to NASGA, and NASGA already knows about the 20-foot open stone, it will not update it to 30-foot. You would have to go into NASGA manually and make those corrections. So while the Send to NASGA feature is incredibly convenient, wait until you have finished settling your scores on Heavy Athlete, then send it to NASGA. You can use Heavy Athlete for live scoring, but give it a day, make sure everything looks correct before you hit that Send to NASGA button. Okay, the other most requested question that I've been getting is, okay, how do I add athletes to a game? Because when you don't run your game completely through the Heavy Athlete system, you still need to be able to add athletes. That's where our Add Athlete button over on the left-hand side comes in. If we click on it and wait for it to load, there we go, you'll be taken to this screen. There are two kind of separate systems on this page. The first thing you want to do is try to find somebody in the Heavy Athlete system. If you can find somebody's name here, then that completely removes all the problems that people have on NASGA of their name being misspelled and them showing up under multiple athletes because of those name typos. So for example, if I try to add Bob Ross to my game, you'll see I don't have any results for Bob Ross because Bob Ross is a painter, not a Highland Games athlete. So, doesn't work. If I try somebody who is in the game, for example, Wes Kaiser, you can see the actual problem that we're just talking about. Wes Kaiser is not on the Heavy Athlete system yet, so which one of these spellings is the correct one for Wes? I know from experience it's this top one, but when Wes joins Heavy Athlete and actually claims both of his names, he will show up as just a single name here. For example, if I type in Matthew, you can see all of the historic athletes down here, which are unclaimed, and then we have some claimed athletes. It doesn't matter for your perspective here. You can click on any of these names. It's on the athlete then to claim their scores on Heavy Athlete, and that will reconcile any errors that have happened. So if I click on somebody, when their name appears here, I can simply hit this Add Athlete to Game button, and now they are down here ready to be added to the game. We don't want to kick you all the way back to the game page to see the person added, because typically you're going to be adding multiple people in one shot. Let's go back to our Bob Ross example. If I type in the name Bob Ross, Again, obviously, there are no results. I can't find Bob Ross. He is not a painter, or he's a painter, not a Highland Games thrower. But let's say Bob Ross really did show up to my game because he's now suddenly very interested in the Highland Games. That's where this button on the right-hand side comes in. I can't find the athlete in the heavy athlete system. Clicking on this will drop down and allow you to add a new athlete. You want to make sure that you spell this correctly, otherwise the athlete is going to have a hard time finding their data. This is effectively what you're doing every time you enter a score on Nazca. You're in that same field here. You're making a brand new athlete, and hopefully they get reconciled with existing names, but not necessarily. To get this name to appear in our pending athletes, you have to click this button, add this athlete to heavy athlete, and the game. By clicking that, Bob Ross is now a athlete in the heavy athlete system. His name can be found. You can add him to your games. So if you try to do this with the exact same example, you will find Bob Ross under an athlete in the heavy athlete system, and everything should work just fine. That way we're all talking about the same Bob Ross. So you can go through this as many times as you need to, add all of your pending athletes. You should always check in this search box first, make sure that you're giving people scores if they're already in the system. Put the scores on that person. If you can't find somebody in that search bar, then it's time to come over to this search bar and add them. Once you've added everybody that you are going to add to the game, simply click this button down at the bottom that says Add Pending Athletes to Game. You can see up at the top here, we have a green flash that tells us Added Athletes, and if we scroll down, we have our athletes added. Matthew McDougall is under Amateur Men, and Bob Ross is under Other. When you add an athlete in this method, Heavy Athlete will do its absolute best to place the athlete in the appropriate class automatically. Matthew is a man and is not eligible for Masters, so we threw him in Amateur Men. Bob Ross, we have no idea about because he wasn't in the heavy athlete system, so we have no idea, is he a man, a woman, a master, a pro? We don't know. So the other class is our catch-all. Now that segues nicely into, okay, well, how do I move them to the correct class? Because, well, maybe Matthew is actually a pro, not just a random amateur. And that brings us to these two buttons, Update Flights and Update Classes. This is a large point of confusion for people on the site because in the Nazca system, they effectively took the idea of classes and they took the idea of flights and made them into classes. And so you actually lose some specificity there. Classes only exist in rankings. They don't actually matter for the game page itself. This is who you are ranked against, not necessarily who you threw against. If you hover over the classes icon here, you'll also see a tooltip. You can change everybody's classes by simply selecting these boxes here and moving them to the appropriate classes. Once you're done moving people to appropriate classes, obviously hit Save Changes. The one that affects our game page and how it's laid out is flights. Again, you can hover over flights and it explains it to you. But a flight is an arbitrary distinction that you have made on the field. By default, these mirror the class names. But, for example, if I don't want Matthew McDougall throwing with the amateur men, I can put him throwing with the pro men. Even though I've now made him throw with the pro men, his scores are still being entered as an amateur. Whatever his classes determines how his scores go into rankings. Whatever his flight is says what group he was throwing with day of. This is also how you can set up amateur A, amateur B, amateur C. If you want to make those distinctions, this is where you would actually want to make it. Um, Let me put Bob Ross in Masters Men as well. Now, if I hit Save Changes here, it will kick us back to the main page, and you can see that our things have moved around. We now have Matthew in Amateur A, we've moved Bob Ross to Masters Men, and we've broken up Brandon and Will. Instead of being an amateur, they're in Amateur B and Amateur C. Now, again, those flights only affect how things are displayed on our game page. They do not affect rankings. Classes affect rankings. The other incredibly useful thing that you can do with flights is you can add custom flights down at the bottom here. Many people have asked, how do I add volunteers or judges or, whatever other distinction you want to make? If I want to add volunteers, I make a volunteer flight and hit add flight. It'll take me back here. If I head back to update flights, now down at the bottom, I have a volunteer flight that I can say, actually Will was volunteering at this game. If I hit save changes, Will is now in the volunteer flight. If you simply don't enter scores for your volunteers, then they can be recognized in the heavy athlete system and no scores will show up. Just like Matthew doesn't have any scores showing up here. If I put Matthew in the volunteer class, it would just say volunteers and then list off Matthew. You can do the exact same thing with judges if you want to recognize your judges in this way. The other thing you could do with flights is organize teams. If, for example, you're running a pro-am comp where the pros and the ams are in a team together, you can simply allow the athletes to pick whatever team name they want. Make that a flight, add the appropriate athletes to that flight, and that will display correctly on the game page. I know I've said it a number of times already, but one more for the road. Flights affect the game and who you threw with. Classes affect your rankings. The other way to think about it is flights aren't actually real. You just saw me name a flight volunteer. I could just as easily name this flight Fruit Loops, Old Men, Herbie. It doesn't matter. You can name flights whatever you want and shuffle athletes around. Flights only exist as a way for us to display the data on this game page. The classes represent something about the athlete themselves and the implements that they threw. Your classes are things like amateur men, pro women, amateur women, masters, the different masters age groups. That's where you want to record that data. Flights are where you want to record who threw with who. Because we've moved to the Masters World system of Masters athletes, if you have Masters age 40 to 44 and 45 to 49, you can have both of those classes, and that will let their scores be sorted appropriately. But if you want them to throw together, simply make a flight named Masters 40 to 49 and add the appropriate athletes to that class. And now it looks like you're contesting Masters 40 to 49, and you are, but we're putting their scores in the appropriate 5-year age breakdowns. Okay, that's the bulk of it. That is the meat and potatoes of what you can do on the left-hand side here. Now let's actually just kind of run down some of the stragglers. So the first one you come to is actually this view game dashboard. If I click it again, nothing happens. We just get redirected here. Your athletes will be broken into 4 different categories. We have pending and unwaived, paid and unwaived, pending and waived, paid and waived. The 2 big distinctions here are obviously paid and pending and waived and unwaived. Paid and pending hopefully make quite a bit of sense. A paid athlete is somebody who we have the money for the game from. If you add an athlete to the system using the Add Athlete button, they're automatically paid. So you can use that feature to invite pros, or if you have settled payments outside of the Heavy Athlete system, we assume that you've added the athlete, they're paid. Pending only shows up when you're using the Heavy Athlete system because sometimes things go wrong with credit cards. And so an athlete gets added to pending, and then when their credit card actually finishes settling and we know that you have their money, they automatically get moved from pending to paid. Waived and unwaived should also be pretty self-explanatory. Anybody that you have added to the system, you are adding as an unwaived athlete because you can't sign a waiver on somebody else's behalf unless you're their legal guardian. So all of these athletes, I didn't set up a waiver for this game. They are paid and unwaived. There is no need to set up a waiver for a game in the Heavy Athlete system. Before I start talking about waivers, let me first say that I am not a lawyer. Nothing I say constitutes legal advice. Study your own laws and figure out if you need a waiver for your game, but they are not required on the Heavy Athlete system. Okay, with that out of the way, let's actually talk about the waivers because, we need that here. On the left-hand side, third option down is, in fact, waivers. If you hover over waiver, it again tells you a little blurb about what you need to put in, and this is a Markdown compatible file. You can put whatever you want here. You can bold, italicize, whatever using the Markdown language. You can insert images. You can insert links. Blah, 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 blah. We've talked about Markdown a couple of times. Check the link in the description. It's super easy. Takes about 5 minutes to learn, and you can do an incredible amount with it. Now, you have two options down here. Once you've typed in a waiver, you can hit preview waiver as John Doe, and we create a fake athlete named John Doe and fill it out, and it's as if he signed it, so you can see that it actually is formatted correctly, it all looks correct, etc. When you hit submit, it will add the waiver on the left-hand side here, and you will see the most recent waiver that you have submitted. You cannot delete a waiver from the Heavy Athlete system. You can only append new waivers to the system because they're legal documents and they are important. Heavy Athlete has the capacity to issue digital signatures from our athletes. Digital signatures are as valid as a real-life signature. So when you have created a waiver for the game, when an athlete attempts to sign up for the game in the Heavy Athlete system, they will be required to sign the waiver. They will have the option to read it. They have the option to open it up in a new tab so that they can, really dig into it and read it completely. And then they must sign the waiver or they are not allowed to actually finish registering for the game. Those digital signatures, like I said, are valid, real signatures. They hold up. Everything should be perfectly fine. If you don't trust me, because, I did preface this with, I'm not a lawyer, and nothing I say is legal advice. Let me just remind you of that. Don't use the waiver system. It's completely optional. You do not have to. If you do not use the waiver system, I do recommend that anybody that is in this unwaived category come game day, I recommend that you just print out a physical waiver and have them sign it just for your own protection. But again, not a lawyer, not legal advice. One other thing to mention on waivers, as it just crossed my mind. As the site administrator, I have the ability to go in and tweak basically everything on the site. The only thing so far that I cannot tweak on your behalf is your waivers. These are legal documents between you and an athlete, so I can't do it. There's code in place that, because my brother is the one that actually owns this AAA test game, right here, I can't tweak this game. I can't tweak the waiver for this game, that is. If I try to submit something, it'll just kick me out because this is a legal document between you and a third party. I have nothing to do with it. I am just presenting it and collecting the signature on your behalf. So everything else I am happy to help with. I'll tweak scores for you or tweak flights for you if you don't understand. I can just kind of go in and fix things. Waivers, I can't fix. I am more than happy to explain them to you if you email me at theheavyathlete@gmail.com or hop into our Discord server, but you have to be the one that actually makes a change. I can't make it for you. Okay, legal stuff out of the way. One more time for the road. Not a lawyer, not legal advice. Okay. Let's talk about some of the more fun features over here. The second one down is the communicate feature. This is a really powerful tool. Obviously, we've collected everybody's emails that use the site because that's how you log into the site. You have the ability to email athletes in your game. Subject should be self-explanatory. You can just type, whatever subject you want here for the email. Body should again be hopefully pretty self-explanatory. Type whatever you want the body of the email to be. If you hover over each of these options down here, you'll see a description of what it is. The first is our blind carbon copy. You can simply pick which athletes from this list you wish to send the email to. If you select BCCs, only those athletes get the email. Nobody else in the game will. It will ignore these flights and classes options. If, on the other hand, you've left BCC blank, then flights and classes come into play. Flights is a list of all flights that you've selected and have available for your game, including this volunteer flight that we made up for the game itself, and one I made earlier called Test Flight. Classes is the list of classes recognized by the Heavy Athlete system. You can select from both of these. If, for example, I have the volunteer flight, but I only wish to send the email to Masters 40 to 44 in the volunteer flight, selecting both of these will give me the intersection of these two sets. It's effectively an and statement. I want volunteers who are also Masters 40 to 44. If you set a reply to, then that will be the email that athletes reply to when they hit the reply button. If you don't set this, then they are going to have a reply to of theheavyathlete@gmail.com, since we're actually the ones sending out the email on your behalf. If you don't set a reply to, athletes won't have a way to get back in touch with you and respond to the emails. And if they do reply, I'm just going to ignore them because I can't check everybody's emails for everything. So that's a privacy option for you. You don't have to set it to be replied to if you just want to send an information burst out and don't really care what people have to say back. If you check this director copy box, then you will also get a copy of the email so that you can see it did successfully send and all that kind of stuff. If you uncheck it, then you won't receive a copy of the email. Then obviously hit send to actually send it out. I'm not going to blow up people's emails boxes today, so I'm simply going to move on. Let's see, we've covered the game dashboard, communicate, waivers, update game profile, scores, flights, classes, add athletes. Okay, the kind of final things to talk about here are the game shop features. Right now, the game shop is only to do with the free shirts that athletes can register for. If you remember, under update game profile, you can specify, does the athlete get a free t-shirt? Again, nothing's actually free. Make sure that you've cooked in the cost of the t-shirt you're providing into the cost of admission for the athlete. If we start with modify free shirt options, you can see just a list of shirt sizes. These will be the sizes available to the athlete when they register to select from. So you can make whatever modifications you have here. If you aren't going to carry 4X shirts, if you're not going to carry extra small, what have you, obviously you can simply select what you need there. The View Game Shop Orders page will show you a list of all the shirts that have been selected by athletes that have actually paid. So for this game in particular, the game was created before these options existed, so obviously we didn't have any free shirts available. But for example, it could say something like Brandon, extra large, Will, 4XL, and now you know what shirts you need to procure before the game so that you can actually distribute them game day. I believe that's everything on our left-hand side here. The only other option is go to Stripe, which is the exact same link as you get out of your AD dashboard. It's this same go to Stripe button. And we've already talked about send a NASGA. One more time. Don't send a NASGA until you're happy with the scores. If you send to NASGA early, there's no guarantee that the heavy athlete scores you've done afterwards will replace the ones on NASGA, and you may have to go in there and manually tweak them to get them back to correct. I think that's it for this video.